Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another video. This is day 2 of the boat restoration, and well, day 1's video was kind of a there wasn't a whole lot going on to do, and I'll be honest, I kind of forgot to film a lot of it. But I'm gonna try to be a lot better about this now. Yeah, I got to thinking the other night, and I'm like, I really got to start posting some more, because I didn't realize this, but we're at 200 and change in subscribers. I didn't realize we hit 200. I have not been paying attention, so I'm apologizing for that. But also, thank you guys so much for subscribing, and I know it doesn't seem like a lot. Oh, 200 subscribers. That's a big deal to me. That really is a big deal, because it's awesome. Obviously, I'm driving on our wonderful Illinois roads right now. So, yeah, just went to O'Reilly's, bought some carb cleaner. Let's see, bought carb cleaner, a fuel filter, some fuel line that I think's the right size because I forgot the one that came off of it because it broke. Battery cables and an ignition switch because we don't have an ignition switch, so I'm going to wire that in. I'm going to wire an ignition switch in so we can click that on and see what's going on. I cannot, for the life of me, find a wiring diagram for this boat. I spent several hours last night trying to find one online and could not get anywhere. I have the whole number that I took a picture of, but unfortunately I'm missing a digit on the whole number and I can't figure it out. I cannot see it on the picture, so I'm going to look at it when I get down there today. But I was able to figure out where I'm missing the digit, so I just put 1 in its place of the missing digit, and that was able to pull me up there, because on a boat the first 3 digits, the first 3 letters are the manufacturer identification, and the last 2 letters, or last 2 numbers, and there's a letter, and that designates the month and year that the boat was manufactured. Then everything in the middle is just a serial number. So I was able to BS the serial number so that we could at least figure out the manufacturer of the boat for sure and the year of the boat, and it's a 1980, built in November, we figured out. So that's going to be helpful. That'll be helpful in finding parts if needed. But I cannot find a wiring diagram. It's got a GM engine, so I'm hoping it kind of copies the GM wiring codes. I'm not seeing where it does, but maybe it does. But I'm a mechanic. I'm relatively good at diagnosis and wiring, so I'll be able to find. I should be able to figure out what wires do what on the ignition switch, because I'm hoping that the ignition switch is just pushed through the dash. I haven't actually looked up underneath the dash at it. So I'm hoping the actual switch is still there. And we can kind of go off of that, just based on how the switch, ohms out in resistance and whatever. But we're going to put power to it and see if it catches on fire, basically. And see if we can get the starter to turn. Because I spun it over the breaker bar and the engine was not locked up at all. It hit a little bit of wasn't really even a stiff spot. It was just, you could tell there was a little bit more resistance, and I could hear some sound, but it sounded like rust, which makes sense because it was last registered 2001, so it's presumably been sitting for 20 years. So there's going to be a little bit of condensation and rust in the cylinders, so that's not uncalled for, but it's not locked up. It has oil in it. It has relatively clean oil in it, so I'm not going to worry about running the oil. It's not excessively high, so I don't think there's water in it. In fact, it's a half a quart low, so I don't think there's water in it, in the oil. It's not milky. We'll get the hose hooked up to it for the water to see if we can get water pumping through. So if we get water pumping, that's big, because that means we don't have to rebuild the water pumps. Because there's 2 water pumps on it. There's the small block Chevy standard issue water pump, bolts on the front over the timing cover, and then there's the water pump that the actual suction pump that lifts it from the bottom of the boat, the intake on the motor, or not the motor, the outboard, and pushes it into the rest of the cooling system. So the screens are on there, so there shouldn't be large enough stuff to clog anything up in the cooling system. Now that it's daylight, I'll give you guys a little bit better of a walk around on the boat. It's pretty rough, but at the same time, it's not as rough as it could be. It's all pretty easily fixable stuff, because my friend's dad has been into boats his entire life. So he's wooded boats, the structural wood and everything, and this boat's pretty structurally sound. It's just that extra supports for the floor is what they mostly do. The extra supports for the floor and the extra bracing for the hull is what's rotted. So none of the main structure is actually harmed, it doesn't appear, because the main two beams are glassed into the hull, so they haven't gotten any water exposure, period. So we're pretty okay on those, I think. So yeah. Immediate plans for the inside. I think what we decided we're gonna do last night, I would like to paint it because it's, you know, late 70s tan on top of tan with orange carpet. We ripped all the carpet out of it last night because it was falling apart trying to pressure wash it, and the only way we were gonna get it clean was to pressure wash it. So yeah, we eliminated the carpet. I think I'm gonna just Raptor line the inside of it, bed liner it. I'm just gonna Raptor line the inside of the boat in like a light gray Raptor liner. And then what I want to do is two-tone it. So we'll probably do blue, like a light metallic blue, like a bass boat blue, kind of like my shirt color actually. Do a bass boat blue where the tan currently is, and then do a light gray on the bottom, and then where it's got black, we'll leave it black. As you can see it right there in front of me. So yeah, it's not going too bad actually. It's going pretty all right. So yeah, that'll be today's project. I'll get you updated when we actually get to working on it. All right, so 9:30 p.m. update. The whole front of the boat's gutted. We got good flooring up till about 6 inches from that hole there, and then it gets soft, so we're gonna cut that out, replace it. We started ripping the foam out of it. It's a lot harder than we thought, so we're gonna change our attack tomorrow. Coby's gonna work on it while I'm at work because he's off. The engine, it has not fired because we do not have a rotor for the distributor. However, put the battery on it, put new battery cables on it, put the battery on it. We have the trim working down on that switch panel. We do not have the trim working up on the switch panel. But this is the trim pump. The way it works is that solenoid trims it up, that solenoid trims it down, and it reverses the polarity on the motor to either suck fluid or push fluid. So I jumped that solenoid, after I figured out what was going on, I jumped that solenoid with a wrench, and the trim goes up, no problem. So all I have to do is possibly get a new solenoid, but I'm not getting a signal from the switch to trip that solenoid. So the solenoid might actually be good, and it's just not being tripped. I'm gonna totally get rid of that panel. It's this panel here. I don't know why it has 3 buttons either, but I'm gonna totally get rid of that panel and order a 3-position on-off on temporary on-off on switch from Amazon for like a winch for like $3, and that's going to be our trim, because that's all it is on new boats, is a 3-position rocker switch. And all I need is power into the switch, and then power out to one solenoid, power out to the other solenoid. That's it. So the trim works up and down. We ran that up and down a couple of times. That's good. The motor, I jumped the starter solenoid with a wrench, and it spins over. It's a little bit slow, but that battery is an old battery that we dug out of one of the vehicles in Coby's junkyard back there. That we only let charge for about 5 minutes off jumper cables hooked up to my truck. So it's got 12.7 volts, or it's got 12.1 volts, but it probably doesn't have a whole lot of amps in it. So I'm not worried about it turning over a little bit slow right now. And also, it's probably barely made 5 full rotations in the past 20 years. So it's going to have some rust and stuff that it's got to fight through. But we threw her in gear, forwards and reverse, and the prop spins both of them. So that's working. It's shifting the way it's supposed to. It's shifting forwards and reverse. It's engaging forwards and reverse. And the prop's spinning. And we didn't hear any insanely weird noises. So that's good. Don't know if the motor makes oil pressure. We didn't crank it over long enough to find out because we don't have a decent oil pressure gauge. So I want to get that also. I'm probably just going to get some cheap O'Reilly's gauges and screw them up back there for now, just so we have some idea of what's happening with the engine. And then later on, when we start to get into the actual interior, when we start getting into it more, I'll redo the whole dash with marine electronic gauges, because I don't want to run mechanical gauge stuff all the way up this whole way. We'll just run wiring for electronic gauges. This switch panel is just toasted. We're gonna have to get that fixed, or I'm gonna order a new one for that. Radio doesn't work, not surprised. We don't have an ignition key still, and we're not even sure where the ignition wires are, so that could be a problem. But at the same time, I'm not really worried about it because there's not that much on this boat, really. Like, I mean, if we think about it, power steering is hydraulic off the motor, so that's not a problem. We need power to the coil to make it run, power to the starter, and the starter solenoid to make it run. Then we need power to the trim pump and the associated wiring with that, light in the back, light in the front, bilge pump. Really, if worst comes to worst, and because I cannot find a wiring diagram for this boat for the life of me, if we can't quite figure out how everything's wired up, I'm going to rip all of the wiring out of it and rewire the entire boat from scratch, because it will be easier, not necessarily faster, but I can wire this entire boat in a day, if that. So that's going to be the plan with that. And then as we add stuff, we'll add wiring, basically. Because I cannot find a wiring diagram. We'll have to figure out what power feed is for the coil and all that stuff. Probably what's going to happen is the coil's probably going to get jumped to the battery, just for temporary, let's make it start and make noise purposes. And then we're going to hook the hose up to it so that we can see if it's pumping water or not, so that way we can get ahead of that, figure out if we need to get a water pump or not. Got to get the fuel tank out so we can redo the floor bracing. So we'll get that cleaned out. It's an aluminum tank, so there shouldn't be rust in it. It should just be dirt, if anything. Overall, no major red flags other than the wood being rotten. So far, that's the only major issue. So, that's going to do it for day 2 on the boat. And see y'all for day 3.